I'm Ian Cowley. I'm head of data for Ensono Digital, currently working with Darrell and his team to help them build out a data lake using Google.
Yeah, I've been working in Village for about 18 years. I've got about 17 years of experience in hospitality, so it's kind of my bread and butter. And we've kind of brought in Ensono. So I come from an operations background and been in tech for about that time.
So as we said, we're working with deprecating the kind of legacy lake that Village Hotels had, trying to help them rebuild out that. And most of the stuff that we're going to talk about today will be really centered around, what we're doing and the benefits of that. So I'm going to kick off the first question, which is, what were the challenges with the existing data platform?
How long have we got? No, but on a serious note, I think it came down to a lot of poor governance. I think just how the data was being ingested, managed, terminated and accessed. There's a lot of other things that we've got. A lot of the times we were looking to kind of just replicate a dashboard, and we needed to look at, business outcome. What are we trying to achieve by showing this piece of data? What can we do as a business to be more efficient? What can we do to bring more insight? Forrester said everything we want to do. So, but on that side, it's how we do that. And then on top of that, we created, unfortunately, because of our legacy systems, a lack of trust within the data. My system doesn't say this, and it created this, oh, that's not my number. And that causes a big problem for us, right? And we talk about legacy systems. The problem is these legacy systems also have very, legacy archaic systems to deliver to us. They're not with an API first where we want to try and use that. But I think Village has seen that side that we need to kind of get better with that. But they're not going away. There's big investments on that side. And more importantly is to make sure that we're using the data we want to in the way that we want to.
I think that resonates exactly the point you were making earlier, which is about that kind of when you're consolidating all that data from those legacy systems, if you don't have the right technology, it's really hard to build that trust and to get that confidence behind the data, which is hopefully what we're helping deliver. So so on that, what business outcomes do you expect to get from the build?
I think from us, we've got three kind of principles that we look at, but the main two coming through from here is looking at our growth and efficiency plans. Ultimately, get that better insight. I think focus on what the customer's needs should ultimately hit the bottom line, I think. So, and that's the plan. And we're focusing on that side there. And then to help us kind of enable better predictive budgeting, forecasting, so that we, as people, we are seasonal by nature, makes it very difficult for us. If we know how much people we're expecting, we know how we can do our staffing levels and everything else that goes with that. And I know it sounds really easy to say that, but sometimes you can have an event on and all of a sudden we're bombarded with 50 to 100 people and we don't have enough staff on how do we get people quickly. And working with Ensono to give us that insight to be able to drive that from a forecast perspective, but also to make sure we've got it planned.
Yeah, I think the other thing is maybe as well as you guys went through the pandemic, you maybe didn't have the dynamism that you wanted. You couldn't be as agile in your decision making. I think we can all see that there's a rocky time ahead of us, and I think that's also probably a big factor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that we need to concentrate on and spend the time and money to kind of do it correctly. And it goes back to one of the first things is we've gone with a low code, no code mentality because historically trying to make that journey a bit easier for us is easier for us to be able to use it. And also the people reading the data don't always have that skill set to be able to interpret it and then use it in the correct way. So we need to help guide that.
So why did you prioritize this investment?
From my side, big data isn't going away. I think it's refreshing to see that you only have 7% of industries kind of focusing on that. I think we've seen that, especially in where Village sits as a group. That insight to be able to be more efficient and to be able to go through from that. That big data is just not going to go away, and we have to invest in a platform that will give us that transparency to be able to see the multiple legacy systems, but also bring in new ones. I think we started this project and we started getting all these ideas. Why don't we bring in this? We bring in that, but we still need to focus on what we do at the basics at the standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So why did you choose Ensono Digital?
There's a relationship. I think they're looking at the long-term aspect of this. There's a level of trust that we've got. And I think the other thing is that it was refreshing to have a company kind of challenge us. we didn't just say, oh, let's just do this for the sake of doing it. I think they asked the question, why do you need to do that? Why do you need to measure that metric? And just because you've been doing it in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Technology and the way we work is different. So it's how we do that efficiently. And I think Ensono helped us with that. And I think there's also a long-term partnership. I think there's a ability that they can see it, and I think we can see it about how we work together as two companies.
Absolutely. And so what do you think's gone well?
I think, through the process, we've kind of understood our processes a lot better. We can predict revenue a lot better. There's a lot of efficiencies that we've had to create. And then also, going back to the first point, is having that single source of truth, that everyone can go there. That is my number. That's exactly spot on. And then aligning, our processes and data together, and eventually in the future to kind of unlock machine learning and AI. I think everyone talks about that, but it's garbage in, garbage out. We need to make sure we get the foundations right now to make sure that we can do that correctly.
So hopefully I'm not chipping in too much here, but I also feel like through this process, we've also helped you uncover or surface parts of how your business are working, right? So part of that process that we've been through is to just document, taking that understanding of a calculation, working our way all the way back through the business until we understand how that calculation's made, and exactly helping you adjust those processes and refocus where you need to. I think that's been probably quite a big...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to some very basic questions. What's a cover? A person who sits at a table. But that question has so many opinions, and that question alone, in one of the very first questions, we were like, no, that's not a cover, and there's lots of disagreements on there, but we've come to an alignment. As long as everyone in the business understands what that is, we're all saying the same thing and moving towards the same ideal.
Brilliant. Okay, and what have you learned through this process?
I think there's a level of complexity that I think it's very easy to assume that data is just something that can be consumed, but also having the insight that we need to drive from multiple systems to kind of say, we want this data to help us correlate some customer insight to that data. Those legacy systems created a level of complexity that I didn't necessarily see. I think there's also other things where we become very heavily reliant on technology that I think some of people have forgotten what that process is. What is the technology actually doing for us? And we've had to describe that process about why we're doing it and what's the reason for doing that. That's been quite good. And then also trying to see how much confusion data can cause just by trying to align the processes as well as data to say to ourselves, okay, we need to align that system. I think the thresholds that we built in the previous system, they were too high, and that small amount becomes a 1% that slowly extrapolates very big when you think of doing that to 33 sites, and that comes very big. And then it's about using our data so we can get that customer insight and business insight that we need as a business.
And so, now that we're kind of getting towards the end of that kind of initial build, what would you want to do next with the platform and data?
I think it's about looking at this as a big cake, I suppose, and lots of parts that make it. And I think it's joining those other parts into the platform that will allow us to kind of give that more insight, but also understand what a customer is. Village has got 4 separate arms that can ultimately deliver revenue, and we need to see how they all move together. What does a person who comes to our pub and grill, what do they do? Do they go to the leisure, or they're a leisure member? All of those questions come up. But also because we're seasonal and we're tracked by events, that all of those things have a big impact on us.
If you were to give some advice to somebody who is setting out, they're about to start to build out their data platform, or they have a legacy data platform that they're looking to retire and they're going to go through this process, what advice would you give people who are about to go through that?
I think take that step. I think, go into that I suppose, thought to understand that big data is here to stay, and then having that ability and, to go back to that question, why did you start doing this? Because I think sometimes you can get so bogged down in the detail and it's, enormity of this task. And I'm not going to lie, I've seen this task as a lot bigger than what it is. But Ensono have kind of helped us drive that and kind of work with us to kind of make sure that we're doing it in the right way. I think, yeah.
Fantastic. That's all of our questions. Does anybody in the audience have any questions?
Go on, you first.
So I was going to say, if you could go through that journey again, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Oh, that is a good question. What would we have done differently? I think understanding what that goal is. I think when we went into it initially, we had an idea of what that goal is. I think taking the time to do the discovery pieces to kind of understand what you want to get to, I think has to happen. I think people just saying, oh, let's just throw in the data, let's throw in the data. I don't think that's always the solution. I think it may give you a little bit of a bridging point, but it's not your end goal.
I think that's more of an understood pattern now. I think when people put data lakes in originally, that was the idea, right? Just get everything in the lake and you can sort it out later. But I think we've learned through, iterations and platforms now that just doesn't work. It just becomes a swamp, right? So, and so I think that exactly have a much more focused and getting that data to be productive and cared for and managed. I think makes it, then it's going to get looked after a lot better and therefore become less of a kind of a burden and more of a benefit.
So the question I was going to ask is, with the access to all these new insights, has it actually shaped the board thinking around maybe new business opportunities or new business models you want to go into, like health insurance with Qantas?
Yeah, it is. But also our incumbent suppliers are also seeing big data. So from an investment side, we can see it coming through from there. And if they're doing that, we kind of have to move in that. I think what has changed for us is that systems have become very important for us, and also the technology about how we access our data is very important. If they don't have a delivery mechanism that allows us to access it easily, but we want to access every piece of that string, right? We want to know what everything is doing, and then making sure that we have the right governance in place to kind of manage that.
So you mentioned before about the first time failure round was the governance, and you've just mentioned governance again. So what does that mean to you, and how have you approached it this time?
Well, I think Ensono helped us that it wasn't something that was automatically like in front of us. And I think documentation, going through that process and taking the time to, understand your data and who's going to access it. I mean, we're going through permissions and everything else. It wasn't really something it was an afterthought. Whereas we have to understand that data journey from the start to the ending. There's 4 stages of data and ultimately what we do and how we govern that. And I think Ensono have been great to kind of help us. And I mean, I'm not going to be honest, hold our hands, right? This is the first time where we want to go to that next stage or the next level of our data. And Ensono has helped us do that.
So obviously we went through something very similar with you guys, that process of trying to understand the meaning and the value behind the data has been, I think, the big leap that we've made, is to try and document that, understand it, and make it, readable, understandable, discoverable, all of those. Well, transparency.
I think data and people not seeing how is that calculation made. I think we've opened up our transparency. We want people to be able to go all the way down to the raw data, so that we're not saying, well, how did you get that number? That's not my number, and kind of eliminate that lack of trust. Cool.
Yeah, just picking up on that thing, anyway, but how challenging was it to get those metrics agreed? You talked about example of the cover, and it's a classic one of different systems, different measurements. I always think retail, I always think sale. A sale can have 20 different characteristics in it, and everyone calculates it differently. Then everyone walks into the boardroom with a different number. So getting those metrics agreed and transparent, obviously, is really important.
Yeah, so there is a chart of accounts for hospitality that we kind of follow that kind of goes through that, explains what we should be doing. I think it doesn't explain everything, and I think the expertise that we've got within the business to kind of streamline that. You're absolutely right. Our board has 29 different brands that ultimately are feeding information in slightly different ways, and I think trying to amalgamate all of that data in one place, saying the same thing, is important. But for us at the moment, it's definitely the experience of the teams to make sure that we're all saying it. But I think it's also that education piece. As long as we say what we're doing and everyone agrees that is the metric or how we calculate it, I think at least then we're all in the same place. I think that disparity between that's not the way I calculate it, I think that's always been a bit of a conflict, that opinion, to try and streamline it.
And we've certainly found that within those different business units, what we technically call those kind of bounded contexts, those different areas of the business, quite often, so a sale might mean a different thing from an order. And you may need to separate those really and come up with your own taxonomy, which is local to that business unit. And I think sometimes that helps us to kind of decompose that and put those into their own business units and create their own taxonomy.
I just think it could be in a significant size organisation, it's a huge amount of work to do that, to get that alignment across everyone, get that agreement. Just to get to the point where you go, okay, you all calculate it differently, but now we're going to calculate it like this, and we're all going to agree. Sounds like it's really easy, but it's time consuming. It's difficult.
To be fair, thanks for the help of the lovely people at Google, the technology is now much easier. Actually, the work is that is the work, is to understand the business and document the business and get everybody to agree what those values and what those calculations really mean.
I think the hard thing is the culture to go with that. So, people, some experience that we're having, we've got the technology there and we're selling that and that's really important. Everyone said, yeah, I get it. But then the hard work comes because actually from a cultural point of view, people do exactly what you've said. I want that dashboard that I've got beautiful in Excel. Can you just replicate that for me? And that's the hardest thing about pushing back and taking a step back and thinking differently, which comes back to your point about customer outcomes. And that's I think is the challenge that I'm going to find in a similar situation to you.
Yeah, I think you also need buy-in from the leadership team. I think ultimately if they believe in it, I think that drive helps that culturally. If you don't have that, I can imagine that must be a very difficult journey to have.
I'd also say that the culture grows out of success. So if you put, this is what we've done with both you guys, is to start with something small and then try and grow it out from there. Because once you've got one successful case, that's something you can go and kind of, evangelize to the rest of the business and get people on board. And you've got a proof of, that there's value there.
And I would say that's where we've done a proof of concept, but it went live.
As they always do.
No, we knew it would. To be fair, we knew it would, which is why we chose that one. But, you guys have not been around for about, oh my God, people are giddy. Really giddy. Yeah, and I think that I'm saying that the culture is the hardest part. But actually, if you produce something and you've got the hook and then you start to sell, I've become a saleswoman, really. So this is what you could have.
That is the advocacy, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think it's also the efficiencies, right? Ultimately, the platform itself is taking away a lot of those manual processes. So you take that one about Excel, these are doing it all the time. How often do you need it? I think initially, when we started this with Ensono, we need this real time. We want it minute up to date. And then their first question was, by knowing it every minute, what does that help you? We can't react that quickly, right? And that sounds like such a silly thing, but everyone says that. I want to know what's happening right now. And having those ability to kind of step back and look at it that way.
With regard to the source of the data, not the output and everybody agreeing on the definitions of metrics, did you have, or do you still have problems with ownership from groups outside of IT to keep that data clean and accessible, accurate, usable?
So we've had to change some of our processes right now to align that data because beforehand, as we said, we created a threshold which allowed us to kind of ignore that. But as I said, it grows bigger. So we've had to streamline that. And that has been a bit of a cultural shift right now, creating those SOPs. People, some embrace change, some do not. And it's kind of pushing along for there. I think we saw, very close to the start that if we don't align the data, it's garbage in and it's garbage out.
And this is one of the reasons that, to kind of use one of your American style terms of we don't want to boil the ocean. We always try and start small and move, iteratively because it is such a big culture change that you can't get the whole company to get on board all at once. It's about moving in a squad from place to place.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
A little bit of healthy competition in the company is good as well. So if you give something to one area of the company and another area of the company sees it, that's proven to be an interesting culture.
Create a bit of jealousy.
Yeah, well, I want one of them. When do I get that?
Yeah, our sites are very competitive. We've got rankings for everything that happens within the hotels, like my hotel's doing better than your hotel. And so, yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's just human nature, I think. I want to be the best.
This is what you could have had if you came to this workshop. That's a good sign.
All right, just a quick one. So you've sort of spoken about the work you've done today, and that's sort of got you that capability with the data lake, and you talked about sort of financial reporting and all that sort of stuff and forecasting. How do you see that then moving forward and having that positive impact on customer experience?
I think, ultimately a happy customer. I think giving us a better service for our customers is ultimately what we want to lead to. Happier customer is normally a more spending customer. And we're kind of going down that same insight. Because, villages, hotels do have lots of different avenues from that. The more we can learn about them, the better we can help them.
I do think as well with Village, because you have these different channels of the business, so the gym and the co-working space, the hotel and the restaurant, It's about then being able to have, once it's really mature, you're going to have a 360-degree view of a customer, and you're going to be able to then start to tie up and say, actually, really, where are they spending their money? Where do we need to encourage them? Is it about trying to encourage people for, a few cases that we looked at, do we need to encourage this discount from the leisure, right, into the restaurant? Are people actually utilizing that? If we encourage it and we put in a campaign, can we measure that and see if that actually worked? So you definitely need the tools in place to be able to see that and see that holistic impact on the business as you make those changes. And I think that's going to be such a big win for Village.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a long-term journey, right? Not a short one. Unfortunately, it does appear that you always want this short journey, but it's definitely a long one that takes a bit of time and investment.